عرفنا يا حبيبي.
انت عربي؟
أنا عربي
من وين؟
من الأردن. Ashley, just like I know, like this is probably like a big thing, like especially debating, like it's a big thing on YouTube. But are we on record or
No, if you don't want to be on, we won't put you on.
okay? Like you can put my voice out there if you want. Just please, that's just all I ask for. It's because the problem is, like I don't show my true opinion to other Arabs for a reason.
Doesn't that say everything?
Yeah, like it's just people talk about escaping the Matrix, as you may hear, but like I just think if you're talking like in vein of escaping the Matrix from a religious point of view, you should at least look at things in a holistic way. Like I told Marwan, right? Marwan, I told them about the belief in Tawheed, the holistic belief, and the one who, believe it or not, helped me think more holistically was a Jew.
I got to tell you something though. So I'm Canadian. My parents are Israeli. I left Canada because I felt anti-Semitism at university. I went to Wilfrid Laurier in Ontario, and it made me come home. So I've been here for 19 years now. Now I just gave away how old I am. And when I go on this app and I speak to people, I got to tell you, I receive more hate from the stupid, uneducated white kids in Canada and America and the UK, as opposed to people who are from here, from Lebanon, from Syria, from Jordan, because we know, we all know collectively what the consequence of radicalization is. Whereas these uneducated people in the West who have been literally, have grown up with a spoon of gold in their mouth, right? They don't understand that what they say online has consequences, has radicalizes people. And I actually find that I have much more in common with people who grew up in Jordan than the people who grew up with me in Canada. Isn't that insane?
Yeah, I actually agree with you on that because, like, I met someone a year ago, Russian Israeli. He basically told me, like, when he asked me where I was from, "Oh, you're my brother." That's what he told me, and I feel the same way about all these radical leftists who are speaking for me. It's like, okay, well, the best way I could describe like how Israelis and Palestinians can move forward, it's like a big couples counseling. We have to figure it out for ourselves. We don't need people from Canada, people from the UK, people from the US to speak for us. It's bullshit.
I'm going to say something that's controversial. I think that the reason that this conflict has lasted so long between the Israelis and the Palestinians, because essentially we're cousins, there's no reason we should fight. The reason it's lasted so long is because we have had American support and because they have had Soviet and then Iranian and whoever, but there was always external support fueling, the conflict on both sides. I think that the second we actually lose American support, Israel will be forced to solve the conflict. As long as we're provided weapons, diplomatic support, all of that, and the other side the same, there's no reason that the leadership should ever solve the problem. And so I agree with you in that aspect of like, we got into this mess because of the British and the French. We don't need the British and the Americans and the Soviets and the whatever telling us how to solve it. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Like if I just add to your point, I think when we think about it, like dialogue between each other is probably more powerful than any kind of like, oh, I got my posse, you got yours. Fuck that. Let's just sit around the table, smoke some shisha, drink some chai.
You bring the knafe though.
Oh. Oh man. I love your sense of humor.
Something that I ask a lot of people, and like you seem like you're very educated on the subject. So I'm just curious to hear your perspective because I know my answer, but I want to hear yours. I always ask people, like the people who are like really, really anti-Israel, I always ask them between, they always say that the reason for the resistance, the reason for Hamas and all that is the occupation, the apartheid, the settlements, the settler violence, right? Like that's fueling the conflict. Then I always say to them, okay, so explain to me, before 1967, when, for example, Jordan controlled the West Bank, there was no occupation, there was no settlements, there was no settler violence, there were no Jews there, right? Jordan kicked out all the Jews. Why was a Palestinian state not established between 1948 and 1967? Was it because the story was never actually about a Palestinian state?
I think if we're talking about just the West Bank, I think the people living in the West Bank were willing to accept Jordanians as their rulers over Israelis. But if we're talking about like the Muqawamah movement, from what I can tell, like Palestinians who were from the 1948 Israeli borders, let's exclude the West Bank and Gaza for a second. Let's just think about the 1948 borders. Those people were never integrated in Lebanon, Syria, or Egypt. Jordan was the only country that actually integrated the 1948 refugees. That's the factual basis. Now, I would argue that the reason for that was because refugees were not given the opportunity to return, and they were never given the opportunity to integrate, not counting Jordan. Why was the Palestinian state never thought about until the 1960s? Like I said, Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt wanted to form a United Arab Republic. I think people just adopted that because it's like, okay, well, if we're going to have one big country under one flag from Morocco to Saudi Arabia to Iraq, including Bilad al-Sham, the Levant, I think the mindset was different. People were more united under this pan-Arab attitude until the 1960s. That being said, if we were to think about like the biggest issue, the biggest injustice, it was the refugee crisis after 1948, after 1967. They were never integrated in their countries. And of course, I don't think any country outside of Jordan was willing to take on such a big role of integrating Palestinian Arabs.
You're 100% right. And I also, I really respect the king at the time of Jordan.
Yeah.
It was on record as somebody who was willing to make peace with Israel, even back then, and was assassinated for it, pretty much. I've always had a respect for the king of Jordan, and I also think that this is my personal opinion. You can tell me if I'm stepping out of my boundaries here, but I think that for Arab society, having a king, having royalty is a very good thing. If you look at the countries where there is royalty, people respect him and what he says goes, and those are the countries that we've actually been able to have better relationships with. Like Morocco, for example. You know, the UAE have their own, you know, system of royalty. The king of Jordan. We've always had a better relationship with a Arab street that says, well, if my king decided or if my royalty decided, then I go with it. And so that's my opinion. And so I also think that if we go back to what we were talking about before and like the interference of the Western powers and all that, the idea of America trying to promote democracy across the Middle East, like that obviously huge failure. Anyways, that's kind of going on a tangent, but that's my personal opinion. Do you agree?
Yes, I absolutely agree. Of course, being in Canada. Okay, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent on my own as well, but I'm just gonna go back onto what you were saying. Foreign interference has been a huge disservice. That's just my opinion. Sometimes I just think, you know, what if, you know, we just had big couples counseling and just figured it out for ourselves.
Do you think that Israel committed genocide in Gaza? Is that how you would describe it?
That is going to be a tough thing to answer. I'm sorry. There's facts, and then there's obviously the emotional aspect to it. I do recognize that there are IDF soldiers who did their level best to prevent such a thing. I do recognize that there are IDF soldiers who follow the rules of engagement. I am conceding that. However, a big part of me thinks that Palestinians, I'm not talking Hamas, I'm leaving Hamas off the table. Palestinians are the ones who suffered the most. They had nowhere to go. No one would take them in. Their houses were turned to rubble. Way too many have died. And I'm not saying it's just Israel. Hamas is also responsible. And I do recognize that IDF soldiers, like I said, there are good and bad. And I'm sure that if each individual chain of command is willing to hold their subordinates responsible, I'm sure they will.
I don't disagree with anything you said, by the way. Do you think that there is genocidal intent? Not amongst Hamas, that's obvious. It says it literally in their charter, but amongst the Palestinian population. Do you think that the people in Gaza have been so brainwashed that they would have, they would support a genocide of Jews?
The best answer I could give is there was indoctrination. That's the best answer I could give. I'm not holding it against Palestinian children for that.
Can I ask you about your personal story? Were you born in Jordan?
Yes.
If we'll clip something, I promise I'll blur out your face, and I can even use a voice kind of changer.
Yes, please. Please.
I speak to people from Iran all the time who obviously are very supportive of Israel and stuff, and you can see I blur out their face and all that. And
Sorry, I'm just typing it in.
Okay.
Okay, let's ask you guys a follow.
Thank you.
thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Shout out now.